Elliot arrived at Claridge's a fortnight later, and shortly afterward I dropped in to see him. He had ordered himself several suits of clothes, and at what I thought excessive length told me in detail what he had chosen and why. When at last I could get a word in, I asked him how the wedding had gone off. It didn't go off, he answered grimly. What do you mean? 3 days before it was to take place, Sophie disappeared. Larry hunted everywhere for her. What an extraordinary thing. Did they have a row? No, far from it. Everything had been arranged. I was going to give her away. They were taking the Orient Express immediately after the wedding. If you ask me, I think Larry's well out of it. I guess that Isabel had told Elliot everything. What exactly happened? I asked. Well, you remember that day we lunched at the Ritz with you, and Isabel took her to Mano's? Do you remember the dress Sophie wore? Deplorable. Did you notice the shoulders? That's how you tell if a dress is well made, by the way it fits over the shoulders. Of course, poor girl. She couldn't afford Molyneux's prices. And Isabel, you know how generous she is. And after all, they've known one another since they were children. Isabel offered to give her a dress so that at least she'd have something decent to be married in. Naturally, she jumped at it. Well, to cut a long story short, Isabel asked her to come to the apartment one day at 3 so that they could go together for the final fitting. Sophie came all right, but unfortunately, Isabel had to take one of the children to the dentist and didn't get in till after 4, and by that time, Sophie had gone. Isabel thought she'd got tired of waiting and had gone to Molyneux's, so she went there at once, but she hadn't come. At last she gave her up and went home again. They were all going to dine together, and Larry came along at dinner time, and the first thing she asked him was where Sophie was. He couldn't understand it, and he rang up her apartment, but there was no reply. So he said he'd go down there. They held dinner up as long as they could, but neither of them turned up, and so they had dinner by themselves. Of course, you know that Sophie's life was before you ran into her in the Rue de Lappe. That was a most unfortunate idea of yours, to take them down there. Well, Larry spent all night going around her old haunts. You couldn't find her anywhere. He went to the apartment time after time, but the concierge said she hadn't been in. He spent 3 days hunting for her. She'd just vanished. Then on the 4th day, he went to the apartment again, and the concierge told him she'd been in and packed a bag and gone away in a taxi. Was Larry awfully upset? I didn't see him. Isabel tells me he was rather. She didn't write her anything? Nothing. I thought it over. What do you make of it? I said. My dear fellow, exactly what you make of it. She couldn't stick it out. She went on the booze again. That was obvious, but for all that, it was strange. I couldn't see why she had chosen just that moment to skip. How was Isabel taking it? Of course, she's sorry, but she's a sensible girl, and she told me she always thought it would be a disaster if Larry married a woman like that. And Larry, Isabel's been very kind to him. She says that what makes it difficult is that he won't discuss it. He'll be all right, you know. Isabel says he was never in love with Sophie. He was only marrying her out of a sort of misguided chivalry. I could see Isabel putting a brave face on a turn of events that was certainly causing her a great deal of satisfaction. I well knew that next time I saw her she would not fail to point out to me that she had known all along what would happen. But it was nearly a year before I saw her again, and though by that time I could have told her something about Sophie that would have set her thinking, the circumstances were such that I had no inclination to. I stayed in London till nearly Christmas, and then, wanting to get home, went straight down to the Riviera without stopping in Paris. I set to work on a novel, and for the next few months lived in retirement. I saw Elliot now and then. It was obvious that his health was failing, and it pained me that he persisted, notwithstanding, in leading a social life. He was vexed with me because I would not drive 30 miles to go to the constant parties he continued to give. He thought it very conceited of me to prefer to sit at home and work. "It's an unusually brilliant season, my dear fellow," he told me. "It's a crime you shut yourself up in your house and miss everything that's going on. And why you had to choose a part of the Riviera to live in that's completely out of fashion, I shan't be able to understand if I live to be 100. Poor, nice, silly Elliot. It was very clear that he would live to no such age. By June I had finished the rough draft of my novel and thought I deserved a holiday. So, packing a bag, I got on the cutter from which in summer we used to bathe in the Baie de Fosses and set sail along the coast toward Marseilles. There was only a fitful breeze, and for the most part we chugged along with the motor auxiliary. We spent a night in the harbor at Canes, another at Saint-Maximin, and a third at Sanary. Then we got to Toulon. That's a port I have always had an affection for. The ships of the French fleet give it an air at once romantic and companionable, and I am never tired of wandering about its old streets. I can linger for hours on the quay, watching the sailors on shore leave, strolling about in pairs or with their girls, and the civilians who saunter back and forth as though they had nothing in the world to do but enjoy the pleasant sunshine. Because of all these ships and the ferry boats that take the bustling crowd to various points of the vast harbor, Toulon gives you the effect of a terminal on which all the ways of the wide world converge. And as you sit in a cafe, your eyes a little dazzled by the brightness of the sea and sky, you fancy takes golden journeys utmost parts of the earth. You land in a long boat on a coral beach, fringed with coconut palms in the Pacific. You step off a gangway onto the dock at Rangoon and get into a rickshaw. You watch from the upper deck the noisy, gesticulating crowd as your ship is made fast to the pier at Port-au-Prince. We got in lattish in the morning, and toward the middle of the afternoon I landed and walked along the quay looking at the shops, at the people who passed me, and at the people sitting under the awning in the cafes. Suddenly I saw Sophie, and at the same moment she saw me. She smiled and said hello. I stopped and shook hands with her. She was by herself at a small table with an empty glass before her. "Sit down and have a drink," she said. "You have one with me," I replied, taking a chair. She wore the striped blue and white jersey of a French sailor, a pair of bright red slacks, and sandals through which protruded the painted nails of her big toes. She wore no hat, and her hair, cut very short and curled, was of so pale a gold that it was almost silver. She was heavily made up, as when we had run across her at the Rue de Lappe. She had a drink or two, as I judged from the saucers on the table, but she was sober. She did not seem displeased to see me. "How are all the folks in Paris?" she asked. "I think they're all right. I haven't seen any of them since that day we all lunched together at the Ritz." She blew a great cloud of smoke from her nostrils and began to laugh. "I didn't marry Larry after all." "I know. Why not?" "Darling, when it came to the point, I couldn't see myself being Mary Magdalene to his Jesus Christ. No, sir." "What made you change your mind at the last moment?" She looked at me mockingly, with that audacious tilt of her head, with her small breasts and narrow flanks, and that get-up. She looked like a vicious boy, but I must admit that she was much more attractive than in the red dress, with its dismal air of provincial smartness, in which I had last seen her. Face and neck were deeply burned by the sun, and though the brownness of her skin made the rouge on her cheeks and the black of her eyebrows more aggressive, the effect, in its vulgar way, was not without lure. "Would you like me to tell you?" I nodded. The waiter brought the beer I had ordered for myself and the brandy and seltzer for her. She lit a caporal from the one she had just finished. I hadn't had a drink for 3 months. I hadn't had a smoke. She saw my faint look of surprise and laughed. "I don't mean cigarettes. Opium." I felt awful. Sometimes when I was alone, I'd shriek the place down. I'd say, "I can't go through with it. I can't go through with it. It wasn't so bad when I was with Larry, but when he wasn't there, it was hell." I was looking at her, and when she mentioned opium, I scanned her more sharply. I noticed the pinpoint pupils that showed she was smoking it now. Her eyes were startlingly green. Isabel was giving me my wedding dress. I wondered what happened to it now. It was a peach. We'd arranged that I should pick her up and would go to Molyneux's together. I will say this for Isabel: what she doesn't know about clothes isn't worth knowing. When I got to the apartment, their man said she'd had to take Joan to the dentist and had left a message that should be in directly. I went into the living room. The coffee things were still on the table, and I asked the man if I could have a cup. Coffee was the only thing that kept me going. He said he'd bring me some, and took the empty cups and the coffee pot away. He left a bottle on the tray. I looked at it, and it was that Polish stuff you'd all talked about at the Ritz. Zubrovka? I remember Elliot saying he'd send Isabel some. You'd all raved about how good it smelt, and I was curious. I took out the cork and had a sniff. You were quite right, it smelt damn good. I lit a cigarette in a few minutes. The man came in with the coffee. That was good too. They talk a lot about French coffee. They can have it. Give me an American coffee. That's the only thing I miss here. But Isabel's coffee wasn't bad. I was feeling lousy, and after I'd had a cup I felt better. I looked at the bottle standing there. It was a terrible temptation. But I said, to hell with it. I won't think of it. And I lit another cigarette. I thought Isabel would be in any minute, but she didn't come in. I got frightfully nervous. I hate being kept waiting, and there was nothing to read in the room. I started walking about and looking at the pictures, but I kept on seeing that damn bottle. Then I thought I'd just pour out a glass and look at it. It had such a pretty color. Pale green. That's right. It's funny, its color is just like its smell. It's like that green you sometimes see in the heart of a white rose. I had to see if it tasted like that. I thought just the taste couldn't hurt me. I only meant to take a sip, and then I heard a sound. I thought it was Isabel coming. thought it was Isabel coming in, and I swallowed the whole glassful because I didn't want her to catch me. But it wasn't Isabel after all. Gosh, it made me feel good. I hadn't felt like that since I'd gone on the wagon. I really began to feel alive again. If Isabel had come in then, I suppose I'd be married to Larry now. I wonder how it would have turned out. And she didn't come in? No, she didn't. I was furious with her. Who did she think she was, keeping me waiting like that? Then I saw the liquor glass was full again. I suppose I must have poured it out without thinking, but believe it or not, I didn't know I had. It seemed silly to pour it back in again, so I drank it. There's no denying it was delicious. I felt a different woman. I felt like laughing, and I hadn't felt like that for 3 months. Do you remember that old sissy saying, he'd seen fellas in Poland drink it by the tumbler without turning a hair? Well, I thought I could take that what any Polish son of a bitch could take, and you may as well be hanged for sheep as a lamb. So I emptied the dregs of my coffee in the fireplace and filled the cup to the brim. Talk of mother's milk, my arse. Then, I don't quite know what happened, but I don't believe there was much left in the bottle by the time I was through. Then I thought I'd get out before Isabel came in. She nearly caught me. Just as I got out the front door, I heard Joan's voice. I ran up the stairs and waited till they were safely in the apartment, and then I dashed down and got in a taxi. I told the driver to drive like hell, and when he asked where to, I burst out laughing in his face. I felt like $1 million. Did you go back to your apartment? I asked, though I knew she hadn't. What sort of damn fool do you take me for? I knew Larry would come and look for me. I didn't dare go any of the places I used to go, so I went to Hakim's. I knew Larry would never find me there. Besides, I wanted a smoke. What's Hakim's? Hakim's is an Algerian, and he can always get you opium if you've got the dough to pay for it. He was quite a friend of mine. He'd get you anything you want. A boy, a man, a woman. He always has half a dozen Algerians on tap. I spent 3 days there. I don't know how many men I didn't have. She began to giggle. All shapes, sizes, and colors. I made up for lost time. But you know, I was scared. I didn't feel safe in Paris. I was afraid Larry'd find me there. Besides, I hadn't got any money left. Those bastards, you have to pay them to go to bed with you. So I got out. I went back to the apartment and gave the concierge 100 francs and told her if anyone came and asked for me, say I'd gone away. I packed my things, and that night I took the train to Toulon. I didn't feel really safe till I got here. And have you been here ever since? You betcha. And I'm going to stay here. You can get all the opium you want. The sailors bring it back from the east, and it's good stuff. Not that muck they sell in Paris. I've got a room at the hotel. You know, the Commerce et la Marine. When you go in there at night, the corridors just reek of it. She sniffed voluptuously. Sweet and acrid. And, you know, they're smoking in their rooms, and it gives you a nice homey feeling, and they don't mind who you take in with you. They come and thump at your door at 5 in the morning to get the sailors up to go back to their ships, so you don't have to worry about that. And then, without transition, I saw a book of yours in a store just along the quay. If I'd known I was going to see you, I would have bought it and got you to sign it. When passing the bookshop, I had stopped to look in the window and had noticed, among other new books, the translation of a novel of mine that had recently appeared. I don't suppose it would have amused you much, I said. I don't know why it shouldn't. I can read, you know. And you can write too, I believe. She gave me a rapid glance and began to laugh. Yeah, I used to write poetry when I was a kid. I guess it was pretty terrible, but I thought it fine. I suppose Larry told you." She hesitated for a moment. "Life's hell anyway, but there is any fun be got out of it. You're only a goddamn fool if you don't get it." She threw back her head defiantly. "If I buy the book, will you write in it?" "I'm leaving tomorrow. If you really want it, I'll get you a copy and leave it at your hotel." "That'd be swell." Just then a naval launch came up to the quay, and a crowd of sailors tumbled out of it. Sophie embraced them with a glance. "That'll be my boyfriend." She waved her arm at someone. "You can stand him a drink, and then you better scram. He's a Corsican and as jealous as our old friend Jehovah." A young man came up to us, hesitated when he saw me, but on a beckoning gesture came up to the table. He was tall, swarthy, clean-shaven, with splendid dark eyes, an aquiline nose, and raven black wavy hair. He did not look more than 20. Sophie introduced me as an American friend of her childhood. "Dumb but beautiful," she said to me. "You like 'em tough, don't you? The tougher, the better. One of these days you'll get your throat cut." "I wouldn't be surprised," she grinned. "Good riddance to bad rubbish." "One's going to speak French, isn't one?" the sailor said sharply. Sophie turned upon him a smile in which there was a trace of mockery. She spoke a fluent and slangy French, with a strong American accent, but this gave the vulgar and obscene colloquisms that she commonly used a comic tang, so that you could not help but laugh. "I was telling him that you were beautiful, but to spare your modesty I was saying it in English." She addressed me. "And he's strong. He has the muscles of a boxer. Feel them." The sailor's sullenness was dispelled by the flattery, and with a complacent smile he flexed his arm so that the biceps stood out. "Feel it," she says. "Go on, feel it." I did so and expressed the proper admiration. We chatted for a few minutes. I paid for the drinks and got up. "I must be going." "It's nice to have seen you. Don't forget the book." "I won't." I shook hands with them both and strolled off. On my way, I stopped at a bookshop, bought the novel, and wrote Sophie's name and my own. Then, because it suddenly occurred to me that I should think of nothing else, I wrote the first line of Ronsard's lovely little poem, which is in all the anthologies. I left it at the hotel. It's on the quay, and I have often stayed there because when you are awakened at dawn by the clarion that calls out the men on night leave to back to duty, the sun rising mistily over the smooth water of the harbor invests the wraith-like ships with a shrouded loveliness. Next day we sailed for Cassis, where I wanted to buy some wine, and then to Marcellus to take up a new sail that we had ordered. A week later, I got home.